Good morning. What a great crowd, and I guess I am that guy that's standing between you and lunch. Thanks for staying and hearing our story a little bit. So I've got some view graphs I'll pass through. I'm not really interested in spending a lot of time on these, but certainly would appreciate your questions or any comments that you have to make. So next chart, please. So I'm going to start with the mission of the Missile Defense Agency, if we can flip the chart. There we go. I know that's kind of hard to read across the way here, but what I'll lay out for you are the three things that when people ask me what the mission of the agency is, as the department's joint engineering and acquisition organization for missile defense, it is to deploy layered defense. And what do we mean by that? More than one pass that the adversary's got to come through before it gets to its intended target. And you can break that down, right? So from a sensor perspective, it would be indications and warning. The next phase of that could be track. Next phase could be discrimination. But if you're thinking about engagement systems, then I would like to be able to hit it early and hit it often. And that's what we do as we work through the services to provide capabilities to our combatant commanders. In the center is kind of the typical life cycle of what you'd see for any high-end acquisition organization. We must do science and technology. We have to put a pull on the technologies that we need for the future. We have to insert those. We have to get them into development. We do production. We go to very visible tests. And that's a good thing, right? Because the country supports the missile defense mission, particularly in the defense of the homeland. We're very open about what we do. And then, of course, we provide support services to our services that are actually out there executing the mission. Next chart, please. So I always like to kind of start with the threat. If you've seen this threat chart before, it was sourced out of the 2019 Missile Defense Review. And depending on when the next Missile Defense Review comes out, I will shift to using that kind of information. But generally what you see here, even though it's kind of hard to read, the little bullseye up at the top kind of gives you a sense of the ranges. That's our inside voice, right? We often, within the agency, speak in terms of short range, medium range, long range, ICBMs, that kind of thing. And if you can see those ranges, there they are, which kind of a representative launch out of the Northeast heading into the Pacific, just to give you a sense. The big red ring on the outside is what an ICBM looks like, just to give you a sense of scale. So we used to be really concerned about range. And because we were focused on ballistic missile defense of the homeland, we were very concerned about what those missiles do once they're up in space. So if you think about the purpose of an ICBM, and that remains the plethora of threats that are out there, that is the predominant numbers that are out there to be employed by our adversaries, they tend to be focused on going after population centers. So that's kind of ugly. And what that means is they don't have to be as accurate, right? But what we have seen over time is now we're seeing more accuracy, we're seeing larger numbers, and of course we're seeing maneuver, whether it's range extensions in space or if it's maneuver once we come to the atmosphere. Now, intercontinental ballistic missiles, when they come back into the atmosphere, are at hypersonic speeds. So hypersonics are not new for the agency, which is why I think the Congress designated us as the executive agent for hypersonic defense a couple years ago. And so we're moving on that, and I'll talk more about that in just a bit. But what's the challenge today versus what it was, say, maybe 3 years ago, right? It is still hard to pick out the lethal object in space because our sensors do exactly what you would expect them to do. They will track everything. So it's a matter of how we process, right? So as I look around the room and I see some of the incredible folks from our great industry here, it's the people behind those algorithms. It's the brain power of our American nation that allows us to go through and pick out those lethal objects, because you're going to have the tank flying ballistically, right? The booster is going to be flying ballistically. The attitude control modules are going to fly. Solid fuel chuff is going to be up there, right? So we have to sift through all of that so we can conserve the number of interceptors that go after in space that particular lethal object. And if you have RAID, boy, raids are tough, right? Because that's just a numbers game, right? So the department has grappled with and continues to work on how much defense are we going to have, right? And when you hear the integrated deterrence discussion, it really is that offense and defense balance predominantly, right? And then it kind of expands beyond that when you look at the whole government. So what's challenging us today? It is speed, it is accuracy, it is maneuver, primarily in the atmosphere. And when you get to that terminal phase, which none of us like to be there as our final shot, that's why I always talk about layered defense in defense of our homeland, our forward deployed forces, and our friends and allies, right? So that's the threat. This is our placemat chart. You've seen some version of this over the last few years. We change it often because we communicate with this chart. This is the one chart that I take home, and some of you have heard me say this before. Carly is now 16 years old. This is what ends up under her plate at dinner time. This is what I drill her on every night. And so the latest thing that she has now come up with is, hey, Dad, now I understand. You're looking at this through two different lenses, right? Very simply, from top to bottom, detect, control, engage. If I look at any defense problem, that's what we need to build out, right? The detection capability, which are your sensors, the hardened, cyber secure network system, and the movement of data, and then the weapon systems at the bottom. So that's from top to bottom. And then you'll see that we also break it out from a homeland defense, a regional defense, and self-defense view, right? So when you think about self-defense, very, very high service equities. Then we take those systems and we build those out to do the regional capabilities. Just think farther reach and those sorts of things. And then you get to the homeland defense capabilities. So you can kind of just look vertically and see those different battles, as we call them, battle 1, 2, and 3. Why is that important? Because that helps us to prioritize where we put every single dollar and where we do not. Right? If I have an extra dollar, it's going to homeland defense, because that is why we exist, and that's what makes us different from all the other services and all the other agencies, because that is a hard no-fail mission. We got to get that right. The regional systems, that's when the joint world comes together. They're doing very well there, but we help with the ballistic missile side. We're building out the hypersonic capability, and we have cruise missile defense capability that we can rise up and improve coming from the services. So that broadly is what you see here. So from a sensor perspective, early warning radars, there's that indication of warnings I talk about. You go to space, if General Raymond were here, we spend a lot of time working with the Space Force on the capabilities that we need in space. If you're going to maneuver in the glide phase as a hypersonic missile, we're going to lose you if we're looking only through the field of view of a radar, right? So we have to look down, and looking down onto the warm Earth on a hot target, again, exquisite algorithms, hard work, a challenge. We've proved it out on the ground, and we're going back up into space in 23 to go do that. I see this slide has flipped, but I still have a green light on the stairway. All right.
Lots of green, sir. Lots of green.
Thank you. All right. So a little bit about what we bring, what is the integrating element of it, right? So I was raised in the Aegis world, right? Detect, control, engage, spy radars, standard missiles, and what was in between was that combat control system, which we called the combat system. That combat system had very discrete functions associated with it, right? And so we had to make sure that those are all allocated, right? So from a sensor perspective, we're going to task that sensor, we're going to use that sensor to classify what we're seeing, then we're going to build a fire control solution, we're going to launch the missile. After we initialize it, we're going to get it into the air, and then we're going to talk to it. And we're going to talk to it because in the defense world, it's a little harder than the offensive mission. We don't know what the threat's going to do. It's going to maneuver. So we have to take out the uncertainties in the flight, and that's why we have that combat system. So for the Missile Defense Agency, because we treat everything as a system, it is the command and control, battle management, communications is at the heart of what we do. So C2BMC has linkages, and you see all the sensors in that little box across the top. Don't worry about the details of that. But this is the global integrated network for missile defense. So it's not just homeland defense. It supports the regional capabilities that we have around the globe. They're all tied together. So all the sensor information comes in from space, what we have today, on the ground, what we have today, and from the ships that are patrolling around the globe. So all that data comes in and is fused, and it goes to the appropriate combat system for fire control quality data, and then it goes down to the shooters. So the reason I put this in, not just because Jim asked me to talk about it, is because I'm also very excited about what you see up in the quadrants, right? Again, very hard to see, but in the upper left, something called the Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor. That, in coordination with the Space Force and the Space Development Agency, is that capability for fire control quality data. What do I mean by that? That's latency, that's sensitivity, that's timing. And you can go to discrete numbers on what the position and velocity errors are, which is what, when I say we're controlling a missile, it is to remove that error, right? So we're going to get that kind of quality coming from that sort of space sensor as a part of the overall OPIR architecture that General Raymond is working on. The other thing you see there is a long-range discrimination radar, right? We're not out of the business of radars, right? What you want, and all of our combat commanders tell me this all the time, John, we want multiple phenomenologies. It's fancy words for, we like radars, we like IR coming from space, we like unmanned vehicles in the air, getting as much track information as we possibly can. And so that's what we're moving out to do. So this long-range discrimination radar just lit off up in Alaska, up in Clear. I was there back in December because that's the perfect time to travel to Alaska. And we lit that thing off, and we are tracking satellites now, and we are integrating in with the command and control battle management and into the ground-based fire control system to support the next generation interceptor and the ground-based interceptors that are in the ground today. Very proud of that capability, and it's tracking along very well. Down to the left is how do you take care of your current fleet of homeland defense against the ballistic missiles, and that is our SLEP program, Service Life Extension Program. Congress has been incredibly supportive about the ability to maintain the missile fleets as we've got them out there. And so we are swapping out rounds right now. We're changing boosters, we're upgrading processors, we're tweaking the front ends on them. Very important thing to do. We do it for all weapon systems, right? For a strategic capability like this is an incredible capability and great support from Congress, Service Life Extension Program. And then we move to the next generation interceptor. We have two great companies in play today that are moving like racehorses, competing against each other to get to a critical design review. And then we're going to get first emplacement pulled to the left as far as we can through that competitive process. But what we're also going to do is make sure that we don't break what we have today. Right, so we've competed the next generation interceptor. We're moving forward to compete the overall weapon system and the overall systems integration, but we have to maintain our OEMs, right, for the things that we have in the field today and for where we're going to need them in the future. So this is an all-hands kind of massive industry game, and I got to tell you, I'm really proud of all the companies that are playing in support of Homeland Defense. In the upper right, because Jim, I cannot see it, and I always forget my view graphs, Aegis upgrades in defense of Guam. So this is one that's pretty important. We've been working this with INDOPACOM. So if you look at, from a combatant command perspective, upper left, that is clearly a NORTHCOM and INDOPACOM support thing that we work through the services, right? That sensor is going to belong to Space Force. The HBTSS will belong to Space Force, right? MDA doesn't go off and operate. We're not sitting on consoles anywhere when we deploy these things. That's a Space Force thing. NORTHCOM, for sure, when you talk about the GMD system. And in the upper right, INDOPACOM for defense of Guam. And that is going to be an incredible capability that I won't talk about today because I'm standing by for an appropriation and for the future year's defense budget. All right, and then the lower right is the integration of THAAD and Patriot. Those are our regional systems that provide self-defense capabilities for the maneuver force, but we've also tied them together to give the combatant commands lots of flexibility on how they deploy those systems. So we're pretty stoked about that. And we're wrapping that urgent operational need, and we'll get that out the door soon. Okay, next chart, please. All right, this is my last chart, and it's an eye chart. And it shouldn't be, because I would like to be able to tell you about the great partnerships we have with the services. By, through, and with the services, we deploy capabilities to support the combatant command needs. And so just around the ring there kind of gives you some examples. I'm often asked, well, are there MDA people on console up in Fort Greely? No, those are soldiers, and they're National Guard from Alaska, and they're very proud of what they do, and I'm very proud of what they do. Who's maintaining the radars up there? Space Force, operating and maintaining. Who provides security for the area? The Space Force. Who provides at Fort Greely? The Army. Right? You go to a ship, NDA people on console? No. Those are sailors on ships that are operating and feeding data into C2BMC. And if you just keep going around the horn here, THAAD, operated by the Army, they do a spectacular job, and of course we have Patriot. So pretty excited about our partnerships with the services. We've got some exciting things happening, and we'll know more when the budget drops and as we look and peer into the future, because it is a no-fail mission, whether you're talking about Battle One, Homeland Defense, or if you're talking about the regional capabilities that we take forward to protect our forward deployed forces and our allies and friends, and then finally for self-defense, because that's just that critical. Okay, Jim, that's it. And I'll answer questions now if you got them. Thanks for having me here.
Yes, sir.
Oh, you were waiting for me to throw out the first question. A silly question, sir. What should we be thinking about layered homeland defense? Right, and as you try to evolve that capability to get more shots and more opportunities to kill before you get to a terminal defense phase. And then secondly, is there, at what point in time is there the potentiality that those become zero-sum competitors against homeland defense capabilities such as NGI? And then lastly, sir, at the risk of piling on, what's the message you really hear from General Van Herk in terms of the priorities that are coming from NORTHCOM?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And Jim always assumes I can remember 3 questions in a row, but I'm going to try. So from a homeland defense, and I'm just going to pick one mission space, right? So we work across ballistic missile defense, hypersonic missile defense, and cruise missile defense. But I'm just going to talk about ballistic missile defense, and I'm going to highlight the ground-based mid-course defense system. Important, right? The rounds that we have in the ground today have been there for a long time. We've got kind of the old set, you've got the mid set, and you've got the newest set that are in the ground. Through the Service Life Extension Program, we're going to generate more capacity. So we're pretty excited about that. I will tell you, I'm not going to put words into General Van Herk's mouth, but I will say the last conversation I had with him is that he's got high confidence in that system to protect the country today. And for those of you who are missileers, this is the first missile I've seen that has a requirement to cover all 50 states. You ought to just think about that for a bit, right? So the result is it's a big missile, and it's a very capable missile, right? But we don't have enough of them, right? So it's always that discussion on how far do you want to take a limited attack, and where does defense end, and where do we go into other missions to deal with the threat. And then talked about the SLEP program, and the Next Generation Interceptor is our next view, and it's taking on a much harder threat set because, unfortunately, the threat continues to evolve. Technology does proliferate. And so from the rogue nation perspective, those missiles are becoming incredibly complex, which drives an answer from a defense perspective, and that's what Next Generation, or NGI, is. All right, Jim, I don't know if I answered all three or not in succession, but I tried.
You got them all, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Are you going to point them out, Jim? Because there's a nice lady over there. Okay. Ma'am, how about you?
Your house.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Admiral Jen Judson with Defense News.
Hi, Jen.
I usually ask you this question about every 6 months, but I just wanted an update on where you are with Aegis ashore in Poland.
Yeah, great question. Great partnerships with European Command, with NATO, with the U.S. Army Corps, and of course, we're providing the Aegis combat capability in the Aegis ashore in Poland. Now, when you go to a country like Poland and you set contracts to do military construction and you don't have total control over that, it's really an Army Corps thing. We could have done a couple things here, Jen, right? I could have stood up here and thrown the Army Corps under the bus, but I'm not going to do that. They're our partners, and we're doing a really hard thing out there with Aegis ashore. The great thing about this is last year we raised the spy radar arrays into the building way ahead of schedule. We did that as a forcing function, and Army Corps supported us by completing those construction pieces. The waveguides are going in, the equipment is actually in place today. So what we're doing now is we're going through and we're connecting everything, and we'll start running our tests. And but the Aegis is installed now, the radars are there. If you ever go out to Poland, next time you're out there, it looks complete. But we've got to work the interior pieces, all the automation, so that we can do the full detect, control, engage mission. And I'll just remind everybody, the purpose of those sites is defense only against the rogue threats that are coming across Europe, into Europe, and over to the United States. So it's an important capability. And we're operational now in Romania, and we backstop the Poland capability with the ships that we have stationed in Rota. Thanks, Jan. Hi, Jim.
Hi, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good to see you. One thing we haven't heard spoken yet this morning is a lot of industry people here today, and that is software factories are popping up everywhere. And can you comment on that, how it impacts the business you do in MDA?
Yeah, so software factories, model-based system engineering, virtual twins, all part of a strategy to, and I'm a simple guy. I grew up in Texas, Jim, and you've mentored me for many years, so thank you for the question. Model-based system engineering is pretty key. You can't necessarily click it right into a program that sort of does the old document-based build-out for a system, right? So we still have those in the Missile Defense Agency because our roots go back, 20 years or so, right? But what you want to do is digitize so that my vision of model-based system engineering and where we're going with the software factories is that you will know the full pedigree of every single one of those rounds over time as we build them out, right? So I'm not a big fan when folks talk about virtual twins and making those deployable. They're not meant to be deployable. The virtual twin is meant to be the digital instantiation of what we're building, and it's really for record-keeping purposes and for root cause analysis and those sorts of things. So software factories, depending on what system you're talking about, we're going to do something very similar. We're doing it now in NGI. Right, so for Next Generation Interceptor, part of ground-based mid-course defense, we've gone digital. And what does that mean? That means we can go do things like systems requirements reviews and preliminary design reviews, all digitally and dispersed. And what does that do? Well, I've been talking, I think I said it 3 times, about the incredible talent that we've got across the defense industry base, and having everybody come in. We got to do configuration management, of course, but we have the best and the brightest working on those systems, and it helps us to move faster, and then we know where everything is, and we can do full traceability. The other thing, because I know, Jim, you worked in the certification process for a long time, right, with paper-based designs, right? It was hard to fully test out a system. In fact, we tested out maybe a small percentage of those over time, right? You just keep adding that up. Now you can test the full range of those, and you get to a full model of what you're doing. So I'm pretty excited about software factories, but it all depends on how you set it up in each of the programs. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Admiral. This is a broader acquisition question, not just MDA, but if it's even more compelling, the success that MDA has had operating outside of the sequential linear requirements-based process. And with your deep background from Standard Missile programs and the PEO, could you comment on that process, that capabilities-based process, in a world where emerging and disruptive technologies are always going to turn inside of the 5,001 ability to buy them in that old model? Do you see applications beyond MDA, and is that a way we could keep up with technology better than we are now?
Yeah. Nevin, thanks. I will say when people tell me that we're not moving fast enough, it is because we're not very good at getting out of our own way, right? So DoD 5000 is nothing more than the system engineering process codified into law. And so by its own weight and the numbers of decision makers, it slows you down, right? So you've heard me say before, Nevin, I think you've always agreed with me that it's really about decision speed, right? So you want to push down decisions as far as you can to those trusted individuals who can make those decisions, right? And there's got to be an accountability process on how we go do that. We've done that pretty well within MDA, but I tell you, we haven't been perfect, but it does allow us to move faster, and by moving faster, you know when you've got something going on and you can go fix it and rectify it pretty quickly. But if you wait around for, I've waited 6 weeks often to just get on the calendar for someone up in the Pentagon, right? That is not speed, right? That just slows you down. It keeps you from going to contract negotiations, for example, when you can't get an acquisition plan signed. That's just all bad, right? So the department's working to address those things and fix them. And I think that the capabilities-based approach is being adopted now at the JROC level, so we're pretty excited about that. And that'll speed things up. But it really is about, rather than having 50 unknown, unaccountable people saying no, let's get to the folks who can say yes, and let's do it quickly. Thanks, Admiral.
Sir, they keep giving me the placebo microphone. I'm sorry. Is it working? Is it working this time, really?
You got to turn it on, Jim.
Yes, sir. They treat me like a baby in my own house, sir. Silly question. Going forward, what are the types of things that, in terms of your mission, that as we see Russia waking up, and certainly as we see China accelerating, what are the types of, is there a level of increasing support that you can see for your mission from a missile defense perspective, really, in terms of the takeaway message? We heard that from Congressman Turner this morning. We heard that from Representative Whitman. And I'm just wondering, are you seeing the same thing when you look at what's happening in the environment today? Because now we actually have, from STRATCOM and NORTHCOM, we actually now have two nuclear-armed adversaries that seem to be working together, and one of them has made it very clear that they are willing to use that capability if necessary.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jim. I would say that when you take a look at the Missile Defense Agency, right, we wake up every morning, we know exactly what we're focused on. It's missile defense, right? You look at our mission, it's very simple. Layered, protect the homeland, protect forward deployed forces, and do it in all phases of flight. Pretty simple, very clean. It is a debate and will continue to be a righteous debate on how far we want to move in terms of what we go after. So just for clarification, for ballistic missile defense, my charter constrains me to the rogue nations of the North Koreans and Iran, just so they're all clear on that. When you go to the regional fight, however, because it's a faster, no reaction time kind of fight, I don't have those policy restrictions at all. And I would say our services don't have those policy restrictions, right? If something's coming after the ship or after the maneuver force, we're going to shoot, right? So there's more discussion to be had when it comes to homeland. And I know General Van Herk's been working that, everything from who gets to say what a critical asset is, right? What a defended asset is, and it's an important conversation to have, right? And against what threats? The threats really have blended in. If you look at what the order of battle will be, which is why I like to talk about ballistic, cruise missile, hypersonic, it's not going to just be onesies, right? It's going to be all of the above, and they're going to be coming in large numbers. That's a hard answer for us to have today, just based on your question, Jim, right? Because there's a lot more work to be done on how we would change what we're doing. So.
Join me in welcoming Admiral Hill.
All right. Thanks, Jim.